Back in 2010, director Brett Eisner remade George Romero's 1973 classic sci-fi horror, The Crazies. The original film reflected Romero's thoughts on the madness of 70s society, whereas the remake is more about protecting your loved ones from the madness of our current society. I'm a big fan of both versions of this movie, but with all due respect to the late, great George Romero, you won't hear me say this often, but I actually prefer the remake, and today I'm going to Excuse me. I'm taking a YouTube.
I'm sure your 17 viewers can wait a sec. Don't drink tap water today. There's something on the news.
What was I saying? Both movies begin with people in a small town losing their minds after drinking some contaminated water, but the two stories diverge almost immediately after that, and today I am going to show you why I prefer the 2010 version. The movie opens with a bleak glimpse of things to come. Johnny Cash's version of We'll Meet Again plays over the opening credits sequence, suggesting the idea of courage and resilience in the face of uncertainty. Knowing the original version of this song was a favorite amongst family members of World War II soldiers who were heading off for battle, and given the state of the town in that brief opening glimpse, the song sets a deceptively ominous tone, especially when it's contrasted with the day-to-day lives of the as-of-yet totally unaware residents of the fictional town of Ogden Marsh. Population, about 1,200. For now. The opening scene darkens the already grim tone. A crowd of locals are gathered watching their local baseball team when local resident Rory Hamill wanders onto the field brandishing a shotgun. Sorry, a local shotgun. Timothy Olyphant's Sheriff Dutton, or David, is in attendance, and his interaction with Rory is what sends this movie off in a very different direction from its 1973 counterpart. The scene is shot handheld to add a kind of nervous energy. The men are framed in opposition, but they're close enough together to imply a casual familiarity between them. The sheriff speaks to Rory like he's somebody he's known his whole life because he has. Rory's behavior is explained away by his reputation as the town drunk. And when David can't persuade Rory to put his gun down, he is forced to drop him in front of half the town. And at no point does this feel like a big city Hollywood shootout. Instead, it feels like somebody's husband just killed somebody else's husband and father. This pulls us into the story because we want to know who to blame. The first act's closing shot gives us a fairly good idea. As I said, I love the original as much as I love the remake, but they are fundamentally different. The original movie is focused on systems and the lack of humanity within those systems. The remake takes a handful of actual human beings affected by those systems and it puts them under the microscope. Now, don't get me wrong, there is an emotional element to Romero's original film. I mean, just look at this poor little tyke. God, I love 70s movies. But the remake gives us a lovely family and a couple of very likable people in their immediate circle to focus on right away. And that makes this story about people. And I find people much easier to relate to than systems. Think? Dude. I'll take a cheeseburger. The second act opens by doubling down on the humanity of the story. We meet David's wife, Judy, who's the town doctor, and her assistant, Becca, and the small town charm is undeniable. Then at the funeral home, David tries apologizing to Rory's widow and son, and that goes about as well as you'd imagine it would, especially given she claims her husband hasn't drank in over 2 years. Then we watch David's wife Judy showing us she understands her husband enough to know what's happened is eating him up inside. She also understands him enough to know he's not going to talk about it. What's so refreshing here is we figure all this out from watching her actions, and not listening to her say these things to him for our benefit. We also know she's pregnant because of the way he's rubbing her tummy. It bears noting, at this point in the story, we're already familiar with all the characters this movie is going to focus on, and we are aware of their dynamics. At the same point in the original movie, we didn't know anybody, which was not a result of poor writing. It was actually Romero's point. He pulled all of the humanity out of his screenplay so we would feel the coldness of the systems he was criticizing. You see? Same, but different. The next morning, after the coroners confirmed Rory's blood alcohol was 0, David bumps into another local named Bill, who is kind of off in his own little world. He snaps out of it a moment later and ends up looking the way lots of us do in work at 10:30 on any given Monday morning. Bill's fuzzy state is an important one symbolically speaking, and we'll talk about that more later on. Naturally, Bill's wife believes something is wrong, so she sends him to Dr. Judy for a once-over. Dr. Judy can't find anything wrong medically, but she schedules him for a CAT scan on a just-in-case basis. But Bill doesn't make it to that appointment because later that night he chases his wife and son into a room and locks the door before he sets the place on fire. In the aftermath, as Judy is learning what Bill's done to her best friend and son, the film pays homage to some of the creepier aspects of the original movie, as Bill whistles casually while his family burns next to him. One of the most unsettling elements of the original film is the utter emotional detachment of the crazy folks, as demonstrated perfectly by this grinning granny and her nasty knitting needle.
Up there, your husband downstairs.
The following day, while Bill's zombieing up the holding cells, a group of hunters trips over a dead soldier who parachuted in from somewhere. The ensuing search leads them to finding the plane the soldier jumped out of. The discovery causes the faceless onlookers to initiate a containment protocol, and that's just never a good thing for anybody. Being the man in charge, David puts 2 and 2 together and deduces the drinking water is causing whatever's happening, but when he tells the mayor to choke off the water supply, he gets shut down Jaws style. So, being a confident alpha male from 2010, David does the right thing and shuts the water down himself. Meanwhile, back in the holding cells, Bill has graduated from zombie to very angry zombie. Shut up, Kaya. Hassan Piker's a dick. And when they try arranging transportation for him to a proper jail, they realize the telephone lines and the internet has been shut off. That leads the sheriff to discover what we already know. And from this point forward, the action never really stops. Then a loud commotion brings David into the funeral home where he makes the gruesome discovery somebody stitched a living person's eyes and mouth shut. David cuts him free just in time to hear the whispered warning, "Behind you." This horror scene would be indistinguishable from 1,000 others if Breck Eisner hadn't decided to make this an intimate small-town love story and then directed every scene accordingly. We've seen 10 times worse than somebody coming after somebody with a bone saw, but this scene hits differently because this mortician, Jim Finley, asked David if he was okay after the shooting incident just hours earlier, and he asked him that because they're old friends. So that makes it scarier. What do you mean, why? What's the only thing scarier than a man coming after your bits with a bone saw? Your friend coming after your bits with a bone saw. Why do I have to explain every goddamn thing to you? After the nail-biting back and forth, Deputy Russell saves the day and the potential for David to have a second child someday. And then as David's trying unsuccessfully to convince his doctor wife to leave town, the army arrives. They're all carted off on buses, rather poetically, back to the baseball field where it all kicked off originally. David's wife has a temperature, so she's hauled away, and when she tells them her fever is from pregnancy, she is ignored. So David's immediate mission becomes rescuing her before it is too late. David and the rest of the supposedly healthy people are transported to supposed safety, but David's not having it, and he
He kind of loses his temper, but we're not going to hold that against him because we have no idea what he might be going through. He probably regrets losing his temper very much, and he would probably say sorry if he could. He escapes back to the police station where he finds Deputy Russell has had the same idea. And while they're loading up on ammunition, Dr. Judy is having a bit of a rough time with the sick folks. And as she's strapped down to a gurney next to her assistant Becca, one of the crazies comes in for a ward inspection with a pitchfork. I'd have used a straight razor myself.
This scene's simplicity creates a unique type of terror. It balances silence and the need to stay utterly motionless with the awareness doing both of these things isn't going to save you either. Some of the patients are too sick to understand the predicament they're in, but Judy isn't. So she draws the crazy away from Becca with a well-timed scream. Right as she's about to pay for her selfless act, the cavalry arrives.
The group creeps through the apocalyptic remnants of their once quiet, peaceful town in a scene mirroring what we were shown in the opening frames of the movie. They immediately encounter the other kind of crazies these sorts of situations inevitably create. The locals, who decide to take it upon themselves to eradicate anybody they suspect is sick, whether they are or not. Fuck.
And with no other options, they sneak back to David's to resurrect his old broken-down car. And on the walk back, he tries reassuring his wife everything's going to be okay, the way a good husband should, but he's married a very smart woman. Becky decides to make a run for her boyfriend's farm to see if he's alive. When David's flustered, they don't have the time for this kind of thing. His wife reminds him he just made the time for her. And that brings us back to the love story at the heart of this horror story.
Aww. You think I'm incapable of appreciating a little romance on my own channel because the only thing I can think about right now is splitting this goddamn camera in half with an axe wrapped in barbed wire? I love romance.
After barely escaping an army reconnaissance team that killed Becca's boyfriend, they make it home the following morning. But the town drunk Rory's wife and son are waiting there for them, both fully infected and acting on their darkest desires as a result. Except, isn't this probably what they'd be doing if they weren't sick?
After a tense but very satisfying scuffle, Deputy Russell saves the day for a second time with a well-placed bullet from outside the window. And when he comes inside, his demeanor shifts in a way you can't quite pin down. He might be getting sick, but he might not be getting sick, too.
And everything he does from this scene forward balances precariously on that razor-thin line between the two possibilities.
And it's a subtle but effective way to demonstrate the kind of paranoia this sort of situation would naturally cause between people under this much stress. And also, it might allude to what I was referring to back when Bill's sanity first started slipping away from him on the bleachers, but I've either told you about that already, or I'm not supposed to talk about it until later, and unfortunately, there's no real way of knowing either way.
Once they finally get the old car fired up, an unexpected helicopter sends them hurtling into an abandoned car wash for cover. Except it's not abandoned at all. Somebody blinds them to their immediate surroundings by sending them through it. And right as they're escaping this next tense, action-packed predicament, Becca's pulled from the back seat of the car and hanged from the car wash roof unceremoniously. Before they have time to even process the loss, the helicopter blows their car all the way back to the house. And then some. And while the car is still burning, one of the mysterious men in black's SUVs makes an appearance.
And right when David's about to coax him off the road for a friendly chit-chat, his overzealous deputy takes a slightly more direct approach.
30 seconds into a conversation that might have led to some kind of progress, Deputy Russell gets even more direct. And we still can't tell if he's motivated by righteous indignation or a mouthful of dirty government water. But then he leans very heavily towards the latter when he insists his old friend and boss start doing things his way, at gunpoint. But that only lasts a few minutes until he drops his guard long enough for David to right his friend and deputy's recent wrongdoings.
Russell immediately acknowledges and apologizes for his behavior, and that leaves us in the audience wrestling with the wonderful ambiguity of the cause of his behavior.
Back on the bench, we might have been witnessing the contaminated water starting to corrupt Bill, and we could say the same about Deputy Russell's newfound uncharacteristic aggression. After all, the whole town is starting to tear itself apart.
But if you look at some of the imagery Eisner's chosen to show us without overtly referencing any of it directly, I would suggest he's suggesting something else. I would also suggest you don't disagree with me right now. Kindly indulge me a moment while I reframe a few things you've already seen.
What do chemtrails and bioweapons and shady figures in black SUVs and containment quarantines and mass roundups into FEMA camps all have in common?
Well, in pre-9/11 times, I miss pre-9/11 times. These were all fodder for conspiracy theorists. But by 2025, we know these things are all very real. And we've all seen the way people can react to them, or even just the idea of them. Lots of us have watched our friends and even our family members go icy cold overnight because we didn't respond appropriately to something somebody said on TV. At its best, it's pretty shitty, but at its worst, it's like watching your loved ones become somebody else. Somebody you don't recognize. Somebody crazy.
Before we get confirmation of Russell's condition either way, he completely redeems himself for his behavior. He brings the second act to a close when he draws the army's attention onto himself, so David and his wife and their unborn child can escape to safety, albeit temporary and relative. The majority of the final act is spent at a rest stop gas station. On arriving, they make another grisly discovery. They realize the army's incinerated an entire truck full of supposedly healthy people. That realization adds to the weight the couple's escaped what would have been their inevitable deaths. Devastated at the thought all of their friends and an entire town's worth of people are gone, they decide the only way forward is to the adjacent town of Cedar Rapids.
But if Breck Eisner's taught us anything with this movie, it's that there will always be something else waiting for you around the corner. Or in this case, standing in the kitchen.
To crank up the tension even further, David overhears the commencement of a literal ticking time bomb, and they announce the start of a countdown for a tactical nuclear bomb headed to wipe out the town. Then the lights go out and the vigilante men from earlier present themselves in fully infected crazy form. Judy hides Jurassic Park style until she's rescued by a jump scare from her own husband. They find a truck, but of course it's not going to be that easy in this movie. After a spectacular, fiery, oil-soaked fist fight, they do finally get on the road. The couple narrowly escapes the fallout from the nuclear blast, and the story ends with them looking enthusiastically towards their new lives in Cedar Rapids, completely oblivious to the fact the powers that caused all of this to happen in the first place have other plans for them. Fortunately, I always record a backup voiceover in case of just such an emergency, and if this doesn't make any sense to you logistically, hey, look over there. That's a puppy. This movie has plenty of blood and guts and great action and great acting, and I appreciate Breck Eisner for proving you can wrap a love story up inside a blanket of horrific and graphic violence and make it work. But what sticks with me most about the 2010 version of the Crazies is the two questions I think it's posing. Firstly, we couldn't tell if Deputy Russell was infected or if he was just cracking under the immense pressure of the circumstances. And if we can't differentiate between the behavior of somebody under the influence of a government-issued bioweapon and somebody reacting to people under that influence, it kind of renders the bioweapon obsolete, doesn't it? If that's the case, this movie's title becomes scary for a whole bunch of other reasons. Is Breck Eisner suggesting we all have a terrible potential within us, or is he flat out calling you and I crazy? The other thing this movie got me thinking about was how far I would go for somebody I supposedly loved. Half the men in the town left their families behind because they'd be shot if they didn't, but David didn't let that deter him. I do understand this is a movie, but so far, I've never met a girl I would take a bullet for, and I'm not exactly in my prime. Both of these questions led me to conclude we're probably labeling the wrong people the crazies in this movie. If you've already seen The Crazies, either version, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments section. As always, thank you very much for watching my little video. I will make sure this guy is happy and healthy again for next week's review. I just wonder if he knows he's doing a first view reaction for The Strangers Chapter 2. Well, that answers that. Until next time, folks.